In this episode, we want to take a look at the characteristics of rich countries and poor countries. The Fraser Institute has gone through nations of the world to try to identify what characteristics cause a nation to build wealth and what characteristics cause a nation to not build wealth or to dissipate wealth. And the most common answer when somebody asks, why is a nation wealthy, is that people assume that there are more natural resources. But this doesn't explain why Switzerland is one of the richest countries in the world on a per person basis, or Israel, or Singapore, or Hong Kong. The United States, of course, is the wealthiest country in the world, has enormous natural resources, but it doesn't fit the pattern of all wealthy countries. Japan is a relatively wealthy country, yet does not have an abundance of natural resources. So what are the characteristics that makes a country build wealth to become rich, and what are the characteristics that prevent that from happening? Well, the first characteristic of a rich country that the Fraser Institute has identified is that a country must have, to become wealthy, must embrace the concept of private property. When you have private property, you then can see the fruit or the result of your investment. If you plant a fruit tree, in 5 years you're going to have fruit. But what would cause you to do that investment if you couldn't harvest the fruit from the tree that you planted? So this concept of private property is critical to building wealth. Another characteristic of a wealthy country is what we call the rule of law. Now, the rule of law is something that protects private property consistently. If you own a car and somebody steals that car, you can prove that you own that car and they will suffer the consequences under the rule of law. They will be thrown in jail or get whatever penalty is afforded to them under the court system, because there is a consistent rule of law that protects private property. For example, you come home from school or work one day and somebody else is living in your house. What recourse do you have? You can prove that it's your house. You can call law enforcement to have those trespassers removed or the squatters removed. So the consistent rule of law protects your private property. The third characteristic the Fraser Institute found in why nations become wealthier is what we call the free market. This is where people are free to engage, to buy or sell as they desire. So if somebody specializes in something, they can produce a lot of that something and then sell it because they're really good at it. And they can go then use that money or that produce, and they can trade it for something else that they want or need. So it's the free market exchange is critical to developing a wealthier nation. Now let's take a look at the characteristics of a poor country. A poor country doesn't have the same focus on private property, but it's more focused on collective ownership. With collective ownership, it means the public or the government owns everything. And when you have this characteristic, if everybody owns it, then who really owns it? Well, then really nobody owns it. So there isn't the same level of care and participation in that enterprise. So collective ownership does not incline one to build wealth. It's just either maintains or can dissipate wealth. The next characteristic of a poor country is, instead of the rule of law, they have what we call the law of rulers. Now, the law of rulers doesn't consistently protect private property. The law of rulers is basically a dictatorship. In fact, we can even put that down as a dictatorship. Where the rulers make it up as they go along, or they can change it however they wish. It becomes more arbitrary, even capricious. Does not have the reliability of a consistent rule of law. So you can't be certain what the law will be next month, next year, or in 5 years. With the rule of law, it's a much slower process to change the law. So the law of rulers is more of a dictatorship, and we can think of examples around the world, whether it's Venezuela, whether it's North Korea, tends to be Cuba, countries that have collective ownership, and in order to force collective ownership, they have to have a dictatorship. The third characteristic of a poor country is a command economy. A command economy is where the central government tells people what to do, how to do it, and for whom to do it. A command economy is where the government may regulate prices, production, options. And if you take a look at the countries around the world, a free market compared to a command economy, with a free market, you have a full grocery store with lots of choices. In a command economy, you will have shortages, as we've gone over on the supply and demand graph. When there's government interference, you will wind up with shortages of things that you do want and surpluses of the things that you do not want. Because the natural market, under a free market, will seek to fill the gaps organically, as it were, with millions of little decisions, rather than one big decision coming down from the government on high. So characteristics of a rich country: private property, consistent rule of law, and a free market exchange. Characteristics of a poor country: collective ownership of the means of production, the law of rulers or a dictatorship, and a command economy where the government tells people what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce.